Hello, my name is Santes Beatty, and I'm excited to be able to share with you this Devo in this series, And Justice for All. Have you ever noticed that you can't make yourself fall asleep? I've tried. It doesn't work, right? Where you want to fall asleep, but you can't. And what I've realized is that what we do is we create the environment by which it's easier to fall asleep. That's the challenge, the environment. You know what I've learned about watching the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many of the other civil rights leaders? We can't make people fight against oppression or injustice, but we can create environments where it's easier for their hearts to not only be warmed, but to be stirred to action. And that's really the goal of this Devo today. One of the things that's important to do is to engage early on this idea of power and systems that are negatively impacting people around us. So often I ask the question very early on, what stops us from engaging the power? Sometimes we think that it will never change. Sometimes people with power, maybe they won't listen, that it's not worth our time or our resources, or maybe we are a gatekeeper and we're too connected to the power. Some would argue that it is that space of confronting power that most of our prophets and leaders have been martyred, their reputations marred, their families devastated, and movements stalled. Maybe that's why so few of us are willing to take that risk. But let's take note of one example that Jesus gives us in the text that we're going to be in today. John 8, beginning at verse 1. It says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people were gathered around him. And he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?'" They were using this to question, to trap him, right? In order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down, watch this, and started to write on the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, the Bible says he straightened up and said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote in the ground. And at this, verse 9 says, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older one first, until only Jesus was left with the woman standing there. Verse 10 says, Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" Verse 11, "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I," he declared. "Go and leave your life of sin." So I want to give you just 4 quick things that I think this text helps us to understand. Number 1, that we must posture ourselves to ask tough questions. One question is, where is the man? There seemed to be kind of a double standard here. We're not addressing accountability on both parts. There's kind of a 2-tiered system. He asks questions that encourages people to look at themselves. Are we so close to the power that we're not able to confront it? Second thing I want to mention to you is this, that problems must move to issues we organize around, right? A problem doesn't necessarily require accountability, but if we can address issues in our communities and our society, there are things we can hold each other responsible for. Things like immigration reform, trafficking, school to prison pipelines, mass incarceration, achievement gaps in our schools, the lack of people of color and women in leadership. These are things we can organize around. Third thing we find is we must prepare, watch this, for marginalization by some in the church. Did you see how they were treating Jesus, right? You and I, we can actually become demonized by some and marginalized by others, but Jesus seems to more often side with the oppressed and the ostracized. We do have to know that there are going to be gatekeepers, and sometimes there are going to be moments where we have to develop strategic relationships with people, but we can't always be pastoral. Sometimes we must be prophetic. And then the last thing I would say is this: proximity brings about a sense of urgency. Like, one challenge we have as leaders and as individuals in our communities is that sometimes we're not close enough to the people, not close enough to the pain to really understand the problems and how people are experiencing them. There's something about proximity that creates a sense of urgency. So ultimately, the proclamation of the gospel should be good news for everyone. It shouldn't have been just good news to the men in this story. It should have been good news to the woman as well. May we be as willing to be as transformed by other people's experience as we want them to be transformed by ours. May some inevitable awkwardness and offensiveness lead us to a place of social holiness. God bless you.